Automatic CSS is a popular CSS framework that was developed for the Oxygen and Bricks page builders inside WordPress. I've seen a lot of questions about whether it works inside Pinegrow, and it does. So today I'm going to do a quick video showing you how to make it work and some of the things to look out for. Here I am inside a pretty generic build of WordPress. I'm running the 2023 theme, as you can see, and for plugins, I have the Pinegrow plugin loaded and I have Automatic CSS loaded but not activated yet. The only real change that I made to the 2023 theme is to our page template, where I gave it a content width of 1280 to give it some more room to work with instead of the narrow width. One of the first things I want to do is give you a sense for what Automatic CSS is if you're not already familiar with it. It's basically a set of utility classes and variables that was designed for the Oxygen and Bricks page builders, and it makes designing a layout much quicker than just doing everything by hand. Under the hood, when you take a look in the plugins directory, you'll see that most of it lives here inside the ACSS folder, where it's mainly a set of SAS files that get compiled down to a CSS file once you set your options in the WordPress control panel. So you'll see if I come over to WordPress and activate this plugin, I can come over to Automatic CSS and set a bunch of options for viewport, palette, typography, etc., etc. And when I save changes, you'll see that it's going to generate those CSS files. And the CSS files that it generates are under WP Content, Uploads, Automatic-CSS, and then the file is automatic.css. This is the one that you need to load your styles on the front end. And this automatic-variables.css is one that the builders such as Bricks and Oxygen use on the back end to be able to access the variables. For our purposes, automatic.css is the only one that we really care about for right now. There really isn't a whole lot more magic to it than this, so let me show you how it interacts with WordPress. I'm going to start off just by deactivating the Automatic CSS plugin, and we'll come back to our page. And this time I'm going to open it up in an incognito window. That way we don't see all the admin styles. And when I view source, you'll see that it has all the styles loaded from the theme to make the page look the way that it should. As soon as we activate that plugin, and we refresh the page, you'll see that it's now applying the styles from Automatic CSS. So it's already changing some of the typography in the header and in the body. If we go back to view source, you'll notice that it's already loading the Automatic CSS style sheet. Now, the reason why some of this typography looks so much different is because Automatic CSS by default sets the root font size to 62.5. Gutenberg by default wants this set to 100%, where run rem equals 16 pixels. So let's just set that now. And we'll refresh the page again. And now it looks a little bit more readable. It is definitely worth noting that Automatic CSS does not officially support Gutenberg. And since Pinegrow was built to create Gutenberg blocks and PHP themes, you might run into some CSS conflicts or unexpected behavior. Let's close out of the incognito window. And we'll take a look at some of these options inside of Automatic CSS. One of the first things that you want to do is set your viewport dimensions. Automatic CSS uses a small, medium, large, extra large naming convention, and this is great inside of Bricks or Oxygen, where they also follow that same sort of convention. However, inside Pinegrow, they don't really use that, so you'll just have to keep in mind that small is 480 pixels, medium is 768 pixels, large is 992 pixels, and then the same thing with your typography and spacing. You just have to keep in mind what those values relate to in terms of rems. So once you set your breakpoints, you can also come in and set your color palette, your default typography, spacing, and other options. Again, if you're using Automatic CSS, this should all be very familiar to you, and there's not really anything other than setting the root font size to 100 that you need to be aware of. Now let's come over to Pinegrow, and we'll start a new project. I'll do a blank project with plain HTML and CSS. I'll click Save to give it a name, and I'll call it ACSS Demo. For this, I'm going to create it as a plugin, but it would also work just as well as a theme. So I'll give the plugin name of ACSS Demo, and the slug will be ACSS Demo, and we'll do a version number of 1.0.0. Save settings, and we're ready to get started. And let me also point out that everything that I'm doing here right now, I'm doing inside of the Pinegrow WordPress plugin. It works the same exact way if you're using Pinegrow Desktop. The only difference is that you'd set your WordPress settings to export the plugin to a local file directory. Now, if you've watched the Automatic CSS Getting Started video on YouTube, you know that Kevin goes through a demonstration where he creates a quick card. I'm going to do a similar thing here, only with a slight Pinegrow twist. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to start off by creating a section. And this is just going to be to hold everything and give us a little bit of spacing around the borders. Inside of that, I'm going to create a div. And this div is going to hold the properties for my WordPress block. As a matter of fact, let's just go ahead and define that now. So I'll come over to the WordPress theme builder, create a block, and I'll call this ACSS demo block. And for category, I'll do custom, and I'll call it ACSS test category. I'll register that category and just call it ACSS test. So now when I save the project and export it, it will have created a block for us. Inside this block, I'm going to build out the structure of our card grid. So I'll come back to insert, and instead of creating these elements one by one, I'm going to use the insert code to do them all at once. So first I'll start with a div, and this is going to be the grid wrapper. And inside that, I'm going to have 3 more divs. Div, div, and div. Inside that first div, we're going to have an H2 that says card heading. Then I'll have a paragraph that says lorem ipsum. Then I'll have another div to hold our button. And inside of that, I'll have the anchor that says I am a button. I'll take this whole thing and just drop it right there inside of our block. Now when I expand that out, I realize I probably want a little bit more text in there. So let's just right click on that and say insert more lorem ipsum text. All right, now let's save this and export the plugin. We'll close out the project so that we can see what we have so far. Come over to my WordPress plugins, activate that ACSS demo plugin that we just created. And on our home page, I'll edit that page. And we will add our block. Let's just move that block all the way up here to the top. And then below it, I'm going to throw a spacer in just to give us a little bit of room. So just like we expect, it's pretty boring. It doesn't have any sort of styling in there. It didn't have any inside Pinegrow, but this is exactly what we'd expect to see. Now let's come back into Pinegrow and turn this into something with ACSS. So I'll just come back to the Pinegrow dashboard and we'll click on our ACSS demo project. So if you think of Pinegrow as working directly with an HTML document, this all start to make a little bit more sense. And to illustrate that, I'm going to open up the code viewer, and you'll see here at the top, we've got a Stylesheet link for a normalized CSS file, and another Stylesheet link for our style.css. And that style.css is where all the styles for this particular document live. What we don't have is any style sheet for Automatic CSS. So what we really need to be able to do is we need to see inside this preview canvas the same thing that we're seeing on the front end of WordPress. And there's a couple different things that we're going to do to make that happen. The first thing we're going to do is come over here and close out our index file. We're going to right click to open it up again. And this time we're going to say open in wrapper. Now this open in wrapper feature lets us actually view that preview in the context of the WordPress website. And this is very similar to what you would see inside of Bricks or Oxygen, where you're able to choose a page or a post in order to view a template. So here I'm just going to choose pinegrow.local because we're going to do this in the context of the homepage. And now I need to give it a CSS selector for the target element. And this is where we're going to be inserting the code that we generate inside Pinegrow. So you could use main or you could use body, but what I actually like to do is come back in here and open up the inspector. And I really want to insert this right around the same place as where our block content is going to start. So I just look here in the inspector and I can see that the class is going to be this entry content. This might be different depending on the theme that you're running. For the 2023 theme, it's the entry content class. So now I can come back into Pinegrow and put in .entry content as a CSS selector, say save and open. And now you see the card that we're working on alongside of the rest of the content that's there on that page. And yes, we're viewing it twice because this is the one we're working on and this is the one that we've inserted inside the page. So now that we have this, I can very easily come over and grab this first div that's going to hold our CSS grid. And I can start adding classes to it. So I'll just come over here to the element properties panel, say add class and give it a grid 3. And you can see right away, it's created our grid. And we can come in here and keep adding all the ACSS classes that we want. You do want to know, however, though, that if we close that back up and open it not inside the wrapper, we still get a whole lot of nothing. And that's because, once again, when we open it not inside the wrapper, we don't have any of those classes loaded that are on the front end of the WordPress website. It's only when we do open in wrapper that we see them in that context. So you would think that we're done, right? Let's go ahead and add a few more classes to this grid so that we can see a little bit more of what's going on. So again, I'm going to select this and say add class, and we'll do gap, medium, grid, medium 2, and grid, small, 1 column. And when we take a look at our responsive widths, you'll notice something else. First of all, we've got these XS, small, medium, large, extra large. These don't necessarily match up with what we put inside of Automatic CSS. And that's because our extra small is our 320 breakpoint, small is 768, medium is 1024, large is 1280, and then our extra large is 1600. If we want to use the same breakpoints that we set inside of Automatic CSS, we can just come down here to Manage Breakpoints and add breakpoint and start putting them in. So we've got one for 1280. We'll put in one for 992, 768, 480, and 320. And now when I come down here, I can choose any of those breakpoints to take a look at. Again, they're not going to use that same small, medium, large, extra large naming convention. So you'll need to remember that 480 is small, 768 is medium, 992 is large, and your 1280 is extra large. So let's take a look at how some of these classes work now. The two things that we want to look at are our medium breakpoint, where we said that it's going to go down to 2 columns, and our small breakpoint, where we said that it's going to go down to 1. So if we remember, our medium breakpoint is 768. So anything smaller than 768 should show 2, and then anything smaller than 480 will show as 1 column. And there we can see that it's working the way we want it to. And when we come back to the front end and we refresh, we can see that it's now in a single column. However, if we go into Edit Page, you'll notice that none of those styles apply. And if you remember correctly, that's because Gutenberg has its own style sheet for the editor, which is completely different from the one that it uses on the front end. So that's just one of the 2 other problems that we're going to tackle in this video. So to do that, we'll come back into Pinegrow. And this time we're going to look in our project panel, and you'll notice we have an INC folder and a custom.php. This is where we can load some custom PHP functions for this block plugin. And what we want to do is we want to load up a function that's going to enqueue the Automatic CSS script inside the admin editor. So what that function does is it adds an action of admin enqueue scripts, calls that function. Here we're going to register a style of the site URL /WP content uploads automatic-CSS automatic.css. And then we're going to enqueue it. So let's export the plugin now that that's saved. And we'll refresh the block editor. And now you can see that the block editor is starting to pick up our Automatic CSS styles. This is going to work pretty well for the most part, although there are still going to be some conflicts where the block editor styles have a higher specificity than what Automatic CSS provides. Hopefully once Automatic CSS officially supports Gutenberg, those problems will go away, and hopefully we'll also be able to avoid enqueuing the styles manually. But for right now, until Automatic CSS officially supports Gutenberg, this is where we are. And the other thing that I want to be able to do is use some of Pinegrow's helpers to make selecting our classes and variables a little bit easier. For example, if I come over here to Tree View, and I were to select the card div here, I would love to be able to come in and do add class and just start typing the name of the class. For example, I want to use the BG Base Ultralight class. And I would love to start typing and have this automatically pull them up, but right now I can't do that. Similarly, I'd also love to be able to come in and right-click to select some of the variables for things like colors, font sizes, and other things. But again, because we're not loading the CSS file inside the editor here, we can't do any of that. Even when we choose to open this in a wrapper, so I still can't come over and add class and type BG and have it do something. I can, however, come over to the style panel and start using the variables. So I can right click inside of there and say CSS variables. And now I have a list of all the different variables that are defined inside of Automatic CSS. But let's take this one step further and actually define a style sheet link inside of Pinegrow. So to do that, we'll come back and we'll just say open. So now it's opening it regularly. We'll come into the code editor, and here in the header, I'm just going to define another style sheet link with the full path name of the automatic.css file. Now this needs to have the domain name and everything else in there in order for it to work right. Otherwise, it's going to try to look for it relative to the plugin directory. But you can see as soon as I pasted that in, my style started taking effect. Now if I come over to Style Sheets and refresh, you'll see that it knows that we have this automatic.css style sheet. If I really want to, I can click on the code editor and actually see what's in that style sheet. Now keep in mind, the style sheet's not something that can be written to, so we probably want to come in and lock that so that when we're creating our own styles, it doesn't try to automatically write it to your automatic.css style sheet. It'll use it view only. But the good news is, now that we have this, we can come back and select our card, add class, and you'll see right away, we've got all of our classes listed. So we can just start typing in BG, base, ultra, light. And for here, I want to do a medium-sized padding. So just do pad hem. We'll make it rounded. And I'll choose my rounded M. And just like in the getting started video, we want to give this a small gap. So we use gap S. Now this last one you'll notice didn't do anything. And here, let's close the code view so that we can see that a little bit better. So that gap S did absolutely nothing. And I suspect that's partly because when Kevin created that getting started video, he did it with Bricks in mind. And Bricks automatically sets each div with display flex. Pinegrow doesn't make any of those assumptions, so it's something that we're going to need to set manually. And that's easy enough to do. We just come into add class and say flex, column. And now our gap works. You'll also notice that our button looks nothing like a button. And again, that's because Bricks puts some default styling on buttons. And in fact, on a website, most buttons aren't actually buttons. They're just styled links. So it is always frustrating to me to have a builder have an element of button that's not actually a button. A button on a website is a very specific thing. It's not a link that just looks like a button. But I'm going to try not to get into a big rant about that. Instead, I'm just going to select our anchor and we'll start styling it. So the first thing I'll do is put a button of action on there. And you can see that we're already getting somewhere. That automatically added some padding for us. We'll make this a button small. I want this link to be white. I want to round the corners a little bit, just a tiny bit, so I'm going to do rounded extra small. I want my text to be bold. I want my text centered. And I want the text medium sized. So you could see that just adding that link made it much, much easier to add our classes because we have some autocomplete happening there. Now let's save this and export the plugin. Come back to Gutenberg and refresh. We're going to get this thing that says unexpected or invalid content. That's to be expected. Attempt block recovery. And you can see that we have a mostly styled link. This is again one of those places where the Gutenberg styles are overriding what we set inside the builder. But let's update this and view page. And on the front end, it looks exactly the way we want it. And just for anyone that's curious, why this text is showing as dark green and has an underline, let's just take a quick look at the inspector. And we can see that our editor styles wrapper is going to have a little bit higher of a specificity than our general button classes. And if we started removing these, it would look the way we want it to. So without creating our own CSS styles inside of Pinegrow, only using ACSS, we really aren't going to be able to override these styles. But again, this is one of those things where once ACSS does fully support Gutenberg, hopefully it'll no longer become an issue. But that's it. Over in Pinegrow, we can now view any page normally, as long as it has the link to our style sheet. we'll be able to apply those styles. We'll be able to use the autocomplete and add class. And in our CSS editor, we can also see all the rules that are applied to each element. For example, I can come down here again and select our anchor and see all the rules that are applied to that anchor to make it styled the way that it's styled. And if I want to change anything, I can create my own rule, put it in style.css, and change that however I want. So all in all, I'd say this works pretty well. Once you understand the concepts behind it, it's very easy to use and implement. And the biggest challenge is just working around the Gutenberg editor styles. If you find this content helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel or leave a comment below, and I'll see you next time.